The storm swallowed the city whole. Thunder rolled through Rachel Morgan's apartment like a freight train, rattling windows and nerves alike. 3 floors below, under the amber glow of emergency lights, a father pressed his daughter against his chest. Water swirled around their ankles in the flooded parking lot. The little girl's face buried into his shoulder, her small fists clutching his jacket like lifelines. He whispered something into her ear, words lost to the wind and rain. For a heartbeat, streetlight caught the gleam of platinum on his wrist before shadows claimed it again. Rachel's hand found the door handle, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. She had no way of knowing that the man drowning in desperation below held the keys to her professional world above. Rachel's fingers trembled against the deadbolt as 3 soft knocks echoed through her apartment. She pressed her eye to the peephole, seeing distorted shapes through the rain-streaked glass. The knocks came again, apologetic, almost hesitant. Her security chain rattled as she cracked the door open, creating a narrow slice of light in the hallway darkness. A man stood there, water streaming from his dark hair like tears, holding a little girl whose blue lips made Rachel's chest tighten with maternal instinct. His expensive shirt clung to his frame, designer fabric transformed into a sodden weight that betrayed wealth despite his desperate circumstances. "Please, the roads are completely flooded. My car died right in your parking lot, and all the hotels downtown lost power." His arms tightened around the child, who couldn't have been older than 7. "My daughter, she's scared, and she's been shivering for the past hour. I don't know where else to go." His eyes found hers through the narrow gap, desperation carving deep lines around them that spoke of a man pushed beyond his usual limits. "I know this is insane, asking a complete stranger, but could we just wait out the storm? I have cash. I can pay you for the inconvenience." The offer hung between them, revealing both his privilege and his genuine need. Rachel studied his face for a heartbeat that stretched like eternity, weighing risks against the evidence of genuine fear she saw there. Lightning illuminated the desperation carved into his angular features, the way his jaw clenched as he fought to keep his voice steady for his daughter's sake. The little girl lifted her head, revealing wide brown eyes that held too much terror for someone so young, a small body shaking with cold that had settled deep into her bones. Her tiny fingers were white where they gripped her father's jacket, and Rachel could see the trust there. Absolute faith that Daddy would fix this somehow. The sight triggered Rachel's own childhood memories. Nights when her father worked double shifts and storms felt like the world was ending, when the apartment creaked and groaned under nature's assault, and she'd huddle under blankets, waiting for morning. The security chain rattled as Rachel unhooked it with hands that moved faster than her rational mind could follow. "Come in, both of you, quickly before you catch pneumonia." The man's shoulders sagged with relief, so profound it was almost physical, like a weight lifting from his frame. His eyes closed briefly, and she caught a glimpse of vulnerability that made him seem younger despite the expensive clothes. "Thank you, I'm David. This is my daughter, Sophie." Rachel nodded, already moving toward her linen closet with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to take action when others needed help. "I'm Rachel. Let's get you two warm before hypothermia becomes our next problem." The warmth of Rachel's apartment enveloped them like an embrace as she handed David a thick towel that smelled of lavender fabric softener. Sophie pressed against his legs, still clinging to his soaked jacket with the determination of someone who'd learned that letting go meant losing things forever. Steam rose from their clothes as they stood on her hardwood floor, creating small puddles that caught the amber lamplight and reflected like tiny mirrors. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, with their presence not crowded but intimate in a way that made Rachel hyper-aware of every sound, every breath, every drop of water hitting the floor. "You have a beautiful home," David said, his eyes sweeping across her living space with genuine appreciation that seemed to surprise him. His gaze lingered on the bookshelves, the framed photos, the carefully tended plants that spoke of someone who created sanctuary in small spaces. Rachel moved toward the kitchen with purposeful energy, her hands already reaching for the kettle before her mind fully engaged. "I'll make hot chocolate," she called over her shoulder, filling the vessel with water that splashed against the sides with metallic music. The ritual of preparation calmed her nerves, pulling out mugs, arranging marshmallows on a small plate, finding the good cocoa powder she saved for special occasions that rarely came. Behind her, she could hear David's quiet voice reassuring Sophie, the sound of wet fabric being peeled away, small sniffles that tugged at heartstrings she'd forgotten she possessed. When she turned back, She found him studying her scattered work papers on the coffee table, his expression unreadable but intense, like someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "You live here alone?" David asked, his tone carrying something she couldn't quite identify. Concern, perhaps, or professional curiosity that seemed out of place for someone seeking emergency shelter. Rachel paused in her cocoa preparation, suddenly aware of how her solitary life might appear to a stranger's eyes, the way independence could look like loneliness when viewed from the outside. "Just me and my plants," she replied, forcing lightness into her voice as she gestured towards the window, where several potted herbs caught the emergency lighting from outside. The building's backup generators hummed quietly, casting everything in an amber glow that made the storm seem distant and manageable, like watching weather through someone else's window. "Lucky you don't work for corporate," Rachel added, pulling mugs from the cabinet with more force than necessary. The ceramic clinked together, a sharp sound in the quiet space that spoke of nerves she was trying to hide. "Our new CEO starts Monday morning. Heard through the grapevine, he's absolutely ruthless, planning to slash budgets and eliminate entire departments. Typical corporate shark. Probably never worked a day in his life below the executive level." David's back went rigid, his hand freezing mid-reach for one of her magazines. His shoulders tensed in a way that made Rachel wonder if she'd said something wrong, touched some nerve she couldn't identify. "Maybe he's different than you think," he said quietly, his voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested practice at diplomatic responses. David's hand moved to straighten her stack of magazines with automatic precision, the motion so unconscious it seemed like breathing. Each publication aligned perfectly with the others, edges creating neat parallel lines that spoke of someone accustomed to order and control. The child's hands curved around the warm mug like it was a precious treasure, her earlier fear gradually melting away with each sip that painted a tiny chocolate mustache above her lip. She hummed softly, a melody Rachel recognized as "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the sound filling the space with unexpected contentment that made the storm outside seem like background music rather than threat. David sat on the edge of the cushions, his posture suggesting readiness to flee despite his apparent relaxation, like someone who'd learned not to trust good things to last. His expensive watch was now visible as he'd rolled up his sleeves, the platinum catching the fireplace light and throwing tiny rainbows across the coffee table's surface in patterns that shifted with his breathing. Rachel pretended not to notice how David automatically organized her scattered work papers into neat piles, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency through budget reports and project proposals. Each document found its proper place in an invisible filing system that existed only in his mind, creating order from chaos with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to managing complex systems. "What do you do for work?" she asked, genuinely curious about the man who moved through her space with such unconscious competence, who could afford platinum watches but needed to beg strangers for shelter. David's hand paused mid-reach for another document, his entire body going still, like a deer sensing danger in familiar territory. "Consulting," he said after a beat that lasted too long, the word coming out carefully measured. "I'm between jobs right now, actually transitioning between projects." The lie sat heavy in the air between them, but Rachel didn't push. Everyone deserved their secrets, especially strangers seeking temporary sanctuary. "Consulting for what kind of companies?" Rachel pressed, gently, watching his face for, till she didn't fully understand she was seeking, but recognizing nonetheless. David's fingers drummed against his knee, a rapid staccato that betrayed nervous energy, despite his carefully maintained calm exterior. "Business restructuring," mostly, he said, the words coming easier now that he'd found his footing in the deception. "Helping organizations adapt to changing market conditions, streamline operations, improve efficiency metrics." His description was vague enough to mean anything and specific enough to sound legitimate to someone who didn't work in corporate consulting. "It's not very exciting work," he added, glancing towards Sophie as if drawing comfort from her presence, using his daughter as an anchor to honesty in a conversation built on careful omissions. Sophie's eyelids grew heavy as the warmth worked its magic on her small body, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had kept her alert through the storm's worst moments. She curled against David's side like a kitten seeking warmth, her breathing deepening into the steady rhythm of approaching sleep that made her father's face soften with protective tenderness. "She doesn't usually warm up to strangers this quickly," David murmured, his voice soft with wonder, as he watched his daughter's face relax into peaceful lines that erased the fear and tension she'd carried. Rachel felt something dangerous shift in her chest, a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months, maybe years. The kind of maternal instinct that made her want to build walls around this temporary family and keep the world at bay. "Maybe I'm not as much of a stranger as you think," she replied, the words surprising her, even as they left her lips carrying implications she wasn't ready to examine. The moment hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge or examine. David's eyes met hers across the dim space, and for a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to quiet into distant background noise, leaving only the sound of three people breathing in rhythm. His phone buzzed against the coffee table, with sharp insistence, the sound cutting through their shared silence like a knife through silk. The screen lit up with harsh blue light that seemed to mock the warm lamplight. Board meeting 8:00 a.m. Monday. David's hand shot out to flip it face down with movements that spoke of panic barely contained, but not before Rachel caught a glimpse of the caller ID: Richardson, VP Operations. Her stomach clenched with a confusion she couldn't name. Pieces of a puzzle she didn't know she was solving, clicking into place with uncomfortable precision. "Sorry," David said quickly, his voice tight with something that might have been panic or guilt, or both. "Work never stops, even during natural disasters. Clients think consultants are available 24/7. He attempted a laugh that came out strained and artificial, like someone trying too hard to sell a story they didn't quite believe themselves. Rachel nodded, accepting the explanation, while her mind cataloged inconsistencies she couldn't quite grasp. The expensive watch, the corporate knowledge, the board meetings for someone supposedly between consulting jobs. Why would someone transitioning between projects receive urgent calls from corporate vice presidents at 11 p.m. during a storm? The questions circled like vultures, but she pushed them aside. Tonight wasn't about suspicion or corporate intrigue. It was about basic human kindness in the face of genuine need. "Do you have any other family in Boston?" Rachel asked, changing the subject to something that felt safer, more appropriate for strangers sharing temporary shelter. David's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his features like clouds passing over the moon. "It's just us now," he said softly, his hand moving unconsciously to stroke Sophie's hair with a tenderness that made Rachel's chest ache. "My wife, she passed away 6 months ago. Cancer. It was quick, but not quick enough, if that makes any sense." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with grief that no amount of corporate success or expensive watches could alleviate. Rachel's throat tightened, memories of her own mother's death surfacing like shipwrecks at low tide. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words inadequate but sincere. "I lost my mom when I was 12. It's a special kind of lonely, isn't it, when the person who should be there just isn't?" David nodded, understanding passing between them like an electric current connecting their separate griefs across the space of her living room. "For 6 months I've been trying to be both parents to Sophie while also—" His voice trailed off, that careful self-editing returning to his features, "while also managing my consulting work. The transition has been challenging." Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back against her father's side. David's entire body softened as he looked down at her, as if her very existence was simultaneously his greatest joy and deepest vulnerability. Rachel recognized the look, had seen it on her father's face in the years after her mother died, that mixture of fierce protection and absolute terror at the responsibility of raising a child alone. "Is that why you're in Boston?" "For a new consulting project," Rachel asked, keeping her voice low to avoid disturbing the sleeping child. The question seemed innocent enough, a natural progression in their conversation, but she watched carefully for his reaction. Something didn't add up about David's story, and while she wasn't typically suspicious by nature, the inconsistencies nagged at her like a loose thread begging to be pulled. David hesitated, that now familiar pause before constructing his answer. "Partially," he said finally. "We moved here about a month ago. Fresh start, new opportunities. Sophie's been adjusting well, all things considered. Boston has excellent schools." Each sentence felt carefully crafted, true, but incomplete, like someone sharing select photographs from an album while hiding others. He seemed to realize he was being evasive and added with apparent spontaneity, "I'm hoping this consulting position becomes more permanent. It's with a tech company, Nova Tech. Perhaps you've heard of it?" Rachel's mug halted midway to her lips, her entire body going still. I work at Novatech, she said, surprise evident in her voice. For 3 years now. I'm in the marketing department. What are the odds? The color drained from David's face so quickly, Rachel wondered if he might be ill. The coincidence seems unlikely, he managed, his voice strained. Boston is a small city in some ways. Rachel's mind raced trying to make sense of this new information. Why would a consultant be so rattled by learning she worked at the same company? Unless you're not actually a consultant for Novatech, are you? She asked, her voice soft but direct, eyes fixed on his face. You said you were between projects, but Novatech is hiring a new CEO who starts Monday. That message on your phone was about a board meeting. Richardson is our VP of operations. David's expression shifted through a rapid succession of emotions, surprise, resignation, and something that looked almost like relief. His shoulders slumped as if a weight he'd been carrying had suddenly become too heavy. You're very observant, Rachel, he said finally, no longer attempting to maintain the charade. It's actually one of the qualities I admire in good marketing professionals. The ability to connect seemingly disparate details into a coherent picture. So who are you, really, Rachel? Asked, her voice steady, despite the strange feeling of betrayal creeping through her chest. This man and his daughter had seemed so vulnerable, so in need of help and kindness. Had it all been some kind of act, a test, some bizarre corporate espionage? Sophie shifted in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her lips as if she sensed the tension suddenly filling the room. David's hand moved automatically to soothe her, a gesture so genuinely paternal it confused Rachel further. Whatever game he was playing, his love for his daughter was unmistakably real. I didn't lie about everything, David said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. Sophie and I did move here a month ago. My wife did die 6 months ago, and I am transitioning between jobs in a manner of speaking. The words seemed to catch in his throat, and Rachel was struck by how different he looked now. Less the confident corporate type, and more a tired, grieving father doing his best to hold everything together. I didn't plan to get caught in the storm tonight, he continued. I was driving around trying to clear my head before Monday. Before I have to be the new CEO, Rachel finished for him, the final piece clicking into place. You're David Brooks, the ruthless corporate shark I just complained about to your face. The one I said never worked below executive level and was planning to slash budgets. Her laugh held no humor, just the hollow sound of someone recognizing they've been made a fool. David winced at her description, but didn't deny it. I would have told you eventually, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. It was just nice for a little while to be seen as just a person, not a title or a reputation or someone's boss. Just a dad trying to take care of his kid during a storm. Rachel stood abruptly, needing physical distance to process this revelation. Her hands shook slightly as she carried their empty mugs to the kitchen sink, the routine task giving her something to focus on besides the confusing mix of emotions churning inside her. Why Novatech? She asked finally, her back still turned to him. You could have gone anywhere after your wife died. Why uproot your daughter and take over a company in a city where you don't know anyone? The question seemed to catch David off guard. He expected anger about his deception, not curiosity about his choices. For a moment, Rachel thought he might not answer, but then his voice came softer than before. My brother founded Novatech 12 years ago. James Brooks. He used his middle name professionally, which is why the connection isn't obvious. The storm outside had quieted somewhat, as if nature itself was pausing to listen. He died 3 months ago. Car accident on a night not unlike this one. Rachel turned slowly, taking in the raw grief etched across David's features. So now you're fulfilling some family obligation, carrying on his legacy. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture more complex than the simple, ruthless CEO narrative she'd constructed. I'm trying to... David admitted, his hand still absently stroking Sophie's hair. James built something remarkable at Novatech. He had a vision for technology that actually improved people's lives, not just their productivity. The company was his life's work. When he died, his voice caught emotion briefly, overwhelming his careful control. The board asked me to step in. I was the obvious choice, having run my own smaller tech firm successfully. Plus, I knew James's vision better than anyone. "So you're not planning to slash departments and fire people?" Rachel asked, wanting to believe him, but still wary. The rumors have been flying for weeks. Everyone's terrified. David's expression hardened slightly, a glimpse of the businessman beneath the grieving brother. "Some changes will be necessary," he said carefully. "Novatech has drifted from my brother's original vision in recent years. But contrary to the rumors, I don't measure success by how many people I can fire." Sophie stirred again this time, blinking awake with the disoriented look of a child who doesn't recognize her surroundings. "Dada, where are we?" Her small voice cut through the tension, reminding both adults of her presence. "We're at Rachel's apartment, sweetheart," David explained gently, his entire demeanor softening. "Remember, our car got stuck in the storm and Rachel was kind enough to let us stay warm and dry." The little girl's eyes found Rachel studying her with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Do you work with my daddy?" she asked the innocent question, landing like a thunderclap in the charged atmosphere. Rachel hesitated, unsure how to answer in a way appropriate for a 7-year-old. "Something like that," she said finally. "We both work at the same place." Sophie nodded, accepting this simple explanation with the ease of someone not yet burdened by adult complexities. "You're nice," she declared with childish certainty. "Most of Daddy's work friends talk to him different. They smile too much and laugh at things that aren't funny." Out of the mouths of babes, Rachel thought, suppressing a smile despite her lingering unease. Sophie had inadvertently captured the essence of corporate politics in one observation. "I try to be honest," she told the little girl, "even with people who are important." David looked between them, something unreadable flickering across his features. "It's late, Sophie," he said gently. "You should try to get back to sleep. The storm's calmed down, but it's still pouring out there. We'll head home in the morning." Rachel realized with start that she'd need to make sleeping arrangements. "I'll take the couch," she offered automatically. "You two can have my bed. The sheets are clean and there are extra blankets in the closet." "We couldn't possibly." David began, but Rachel cut him off with a raised hand. "It's not negotiable. I'm not making a child sleep on a couch when there's a perfectly good bed available. Besides, I fall asleep watching TV half the time anyway." David looked like he wanted to argue, but glanced at Sophie's drooping eyelids and relented. "Thank you, Rachel," he said, the simple words laden with a sincerity that caught her off guard. "For everything tonight. Not just the shelter and the hot chocolate, but for—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "For seeing us as people first. Even me." Rachel wasn't sure how to respond to the naked vulnerability in his voice. It wasn't something she'd expected from the incoming CEO, especially one rumored to be ruthless. "Don't thank me yet," she said finally, a hint of her usual directness returning. Monday morning might be a different story. After settling David and Sophie in her bedroom, Rachel returned to the living room, gathering spare blankets and a pillow for herself. Her mind raced, trying to process the evening's revelations. The man sleeping in her bed was David Brooks, the mysterious new CEO everyone at Novatech had been speculating about for weeks. The man who held her professional future in his hands. She'd invited him into her home, made him hot chocolate, and then proceeded to trash talk him to his face. It was the stuff of workplace nightmares. And yet the man she'd met tonight, the devoted father, the grieving brother, the person who organized her magazines with unconscious precision, didn't match the cold corporate shark she'd imagined. Rachel pulled up the Novatech website on her phone, navigating to the About Us page she rarely visited. Sure enough, there was a brief announcement about the appointment of David Brooks as the new CEO effective the coming Monday. The accompanying photo showed him in a crisp suit, hair perfectly styled with the polished professional smile of someone accustomed to corporate headshots. The difference between that image and the man who had stood dripping on her floor hours earlier was striking. In the photo, he looked every inch the confident executive. Tonight he had been a father first, desperate to find warmth and safety for his daughter. She scrolled further, finding an older press release about the company's founder, James Brooks. There was a family resemblance between the brothers, the same strong jawline and thoughtful eyes, but James had a more relaxed presence even in his corporate photo. The release detailed his vision for technology that serves humanity, not the other way around, and his commitment to workplace culture. Rachel wondered how much of that vision David truly shared and how much was family obligation. Did he really plan to uphold his brother's legacy, or would Monday bring the budget cuts and restructuring? Everyone feared. She set her phone aside, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the evening. The storm continued outside, rain lashing against her windows with diminished but persistent force. Within her apartment, three strangers connected by chance and circumstance tried to find sleep, each carrying their private worries into the dark. Morning light filtered through Rachel's blinds with gentle persistence, painting everything in soft gold that made the previous night's storm seem like a distant memory. She'd slept fitfully on the couch, her dreams invaded by conference rooms where she served hot chocolate to board members while wearing pajamas. Through the thin walls, she could hear Sophie's sleepy chatter, mixing with David's low, patient responses. The sound of a family mourning that made her heart ache with longing she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten it existed. "Daddy, do you think Rachel likes pancakes?" Sophie's voice carried clearly through the door, followed by the rustle of bed sheets and quiet laughter that spoke of private jokes and shared understanding. "I think Rachel would like anything you wanted to make, sweetheart," David replied, his voice warm with affection that transformed his earlier corporate precision into something recognizably human. "But maybe we should ask her what she wants instead of deciding for her. That's what polite people do." Rachel smiled despite herself charmed by the glimpse into their relationship dynamic. The way David used every moment as a teaching opportunity without making it feel like a lesson. She busied herself in the kitchen, starting coffee and assessing her breakfast options. The storm had left the city, momentarily subdued raindrops still clinging to her windows, but the violence of last night's deluge replaced by gentle aftermath. The power had remained on thanks to the building's generators, a small luxury she suddenly felt acutely grateful for. When David emerged from the bedroom minutes later, his hair still tousled from sleep and his shirt wrinkled from being slept in, she noticed how he immediately straightened the throw pillows on her couch with automatic precision that spoke of deeply ingrained habits. "Thank you," David said, accepting the coffee mug with hands that seemed steadier than they had the night before. His fingers wrapped around the ceramic with grateful appreciation, steam rising between them like incense or morning prayers. "For everything, I know having strangers crash your quiet evening wasn't exactly in your weekend plans." Sophie appeared beside him, like a small ghost clutching the stuffed elephant Rachel had given her from her own childhood collection. The child's eyes were bright now, no longer shadowed with the fear that had made Rachel's heart clench in the hallway, replaced by the resilient optimism that children possessed in abundance. "Can Rachel come and have breakfast with us, Daddy?" she asked, with the casual assumption that adults existed solely to fulfill her wishes, and that breakfast invitations were simple matters, uncomplicated by social conventions or professional boundaries. David's expression flickered through a rapid succession of emotions, surprise, longing, and something that looked almost like panic before settling into careful neutrality. His internal struggle played across his features like weather patterns revealing more than his words ever could. "We should probably get going, sweetheart," he said gently, his voice carrying regret despite his practical words. "Rachel probably has things to do today, errands to run, and we've imposed enough already." Rachel found herself stepping forward before conscious thought engaged, drawn by the disappointment that flashed across Sophie's small face like a cloud passing over the sun. "Actually, I make pretty mean pancakes," she offered, the words tumbling out faster than wisdom could stop them. "Blueberry chocolate chip, even plain, if you're a purist, if you're not in a rush to get anywhere specific." David's phone buzzed again with electronic insistence, and this time Rachel clearly saw the text preview before he could flip it over. "Brooks confirm attendance at 900 a.m. announcement." Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. The spatula slipped from Rachel's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the kitchen tile with a sound like breaking glass that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. David spun around at the noise, concern immediately creasing his features as he took in her pale face and wide eyes. "You okay?" he asked, setting down his coffee and taking a step towards her with movements that spoke of genuine worry. But Rachel was staring at his phone screen, which still glowed with a damning message that seemed to pulse with accusatory light, each word burning itself into her retinas. Her mind raced through the past 12 hours like a film on fast forward, his intimate knowledge of company policies. The expensive watch that caught emergency lights, the way he'd said, "Maybe he's different than you think." When she'd called the new CEO ruthless, the automatic organization of her work papers, like someone accustomed to managing corporate documents. "You're him." She whispered the words, feeling like glass shards in her throat, each syllable cutting deeper than the last, carrying the weight of betrayal and her own stupidity for not seeing what should have been obvious. David's face went white as fresh snow color draining so quickly she thought he might collapse under the weight of exposure. Sophie looked between them with growing confusion, her small hands clutching the stuffed elephant tighter as the adult world intruded on her simple happiness with complications she couldn't understand. "I can explain," David said desperately, his voice cracking on the words like ice under pressure. "Rachel, please let me explain everything. It's not what you think, well, it is, but it's also not." But Rachel was already backing towards the door, her body moving with fight or flight instinct, while her mind reeled with implications and professional consequences she was only beginning to calculate. "You're David Brooks," she continued, her voice gaining strength as fury replaced shock, anger, providing armor against the vulnerabilities she'd shown this stranger. "You're the new CEO, the ruthless one who's going to slash budgets and eliminate departments, who's going to treat us like numbers on spreadsheets instead of people with families and mortgages and dreams." Her laugh came out bitter and broken, carrying echoes of every naive trust she'd ever placed in the wrong person. Every time she'd believed in someone's essential goodness, only to discover ulterior motives. "You sat in my living room and let me worry about job security while you drank my hot chocolate and organized my papers like you owned the place." David's hands reached towards her in supplication, but she jerked away as if his touch might burn or contaminate her with whatever corporate disease turned people into predators. "Because you do own the place, don't you? You own all of us. Rachel, please listen." David's voice broke on her name, desperation making his usually controlled tone ragged around the edges, like fabric worn thin by too much handling. But Rachel was beyond listening, her mind cataloging every moment of perceived intimacy as evidence of manipulation instead of connection, reframing kindness as calculation and vulnerability as performance. "You let me trash talk you to your face. You watched me worry about layoffs while you sat there knowing you could destroy my career with a single phone call, a single notation in my file." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the depth of hurt beneath her anger, the way betrayal cut deeper when it came from someone you'd allowed past your defenses. The look on David's face, a mixture of regret and resignation, only fueled her sense of having been played for a fool. Sophie started to cry, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Innocent tears that reminded them both of the child caught in the crossfire of adult complications. David scooped his daughter into his arms with movements that spoke of practice born from necessity, his own eyes bright with unshed tears that made him look younger and more vulnerable than any CEO had a right to appear. "I never lied to you," David said desperately, his voice thick with emotion as he held his crying daughter against his chest. "Not about anything that mattered, not about who I am underneath all the corporate titles and board expectations." Rachel's hands shook as she grabbed his jacket from the chair, where it had dried overnight, the fabric still slightly damp and smelling of rain and expensive cologne that now seemed like evidence of deception. "Everything mattered," she shot back, her voice rising despite Sophie's tears, despite the way the child's distress tugged at heartstrings she couldn't ignore. "Every single thing I told you about my life, my job, my fears about corporate restructuring, you have all of it now. All the ammunition you need if you decide I'm not worth keeping around if I become inconvenient or problematic." She thrust the jacket toward him with violence that spoke of deeper wounds than professional betrayal of trust, broken at depths she hadn't known she possessed. "Please don't make us leave," Sophie whispered against David's shoulder, a small voice cutting through their adult fury with heartbreaking clarity that made both adults freeze in their escalating conflict. "I like it here. I like Rachel. She smells like cookies and safety, and she gave me the elephant, and she makes good hot chocolate." The child's words hit Rachel like physical blows, each one finding the soft spots in her armor that anger hadn't quite covered, reminding her that innocence existed in this equation, even if adult motivations remained murky. David's face crumpled as he pressed his cheek against his daughter's hair, and for a moment Rachel saw past her own hurt to his pain, the confusion of a man caught between protecting his child and respecting her boundaries between personal desire and professional obligation. "We have to go, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice breaking on the words. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that can't be fixed with sorry, no matter how much we want them to be." Rachel stood frozen as they gathered their few belongings, watching as David helped Sophie into her jacket, with gentle patience despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. The stuffed elephant remained clutched in the child's arms, a tangible connection to the brief happiness she'd found in Rachel's apartment, proof that some gifts couldn't be returned even when everything else fell apart. "Can I keep him?" Sophie asked quietly, looking between the adults, with eyes too old for her face already learning that grown-up problems could destroy good things without warning or explanation. Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice as David lifted his daughter and moved toward the door with careful movements that spoke of someone trying not to shatter under pressure. His hand paused on the handle and he turned back with an expression that would haunt her dreams. Regret and longing, and something that might have been love if circumstances had been different. "For what it's worth," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the sound of hearts breaking last night, "was the first time in months I felt human instead of just functional." Then they were gone, leaving only the lingering scent of rain and the echo of Sophie's quiet sobs. The apartment felt hollow after they left, as if their presence had filled spaces Rachel hadn't realized were empty until absence made them obvious. She sat on her couch in the exact spot where Sophie had curled up the night before, staring at the indentation in the cushions that marked where a small body had found comfort and safety. The throw blanket still held the faint scent of children's shampoo and David's cologne, expensive and masculine, and utterly wrong for someone who was supposed to be between consulting jobs. Her phone buzzed with notifications that felt like mockery emails about Monday's all-hands meeting, reminders about project deadlines, calendar alerts for a future that suddenly seemed uncertain, and fraught with professional landmines she couldn't navigate. The routine communications of corporate life felt surreal after the intimacy of the previous night, like switching between television channels showing completely different movies. Rachel pulled up the company website with trembling fingers, navigating to the executive team page she'd never bothered to visit before because C-suite executives existed in a different universe from marketing coordinators. David Brooks's professional headshot, loaded with cruel efficiency, the same strong jaw, the same intelligent eyes, but dressed in corporate armor that transformed him from desperate father to untouchable executive. The photo showed him in an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, with the kind of confident smile that graced annual reports and investor presentations. Even in the polished photo, she could see traces of the man who'd held his daughter in the rain, who'd straightened her magazines with nervous energy, who'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of just another employee number to be managed or eliminated. The betrayal cut deeper because it felt so real. Because for 12 hours, she'd believed in something that couldn't exist in the corporate world, a connection that transcended the brutal realities of power and position hierarchy in human resources. The weekend crawled by with agonizing slowness, each hour bringing Monday morning closer with the inevitability of a countdown to execution. Rachel found herself replaying every conversation, every gesture, every moment of apparent intimacy, searching for clues she'd missed or warnings she'd ignored in her desire to help someone in need. Had his knowledge of company policy been too detailed for an outsider? Had his automatic organization of her papers revealed controlling tendencies she'd been too charmed to notice? Had his expensive watch and designer clothes been obvious tells that she'd willfully ignored because she wanted to believe in his desperation? The questions spiraled endlessly, each one feeding her sense of betrayal, until she could barely remember why she'd opened her door to him in the first place. She found herself searching online for more information about David Brooks, looking beyond the corporate announcement of his appointment. Articles about his previous company mentioned his innovative leadership style and commitment to work-life balance values that seemed at odds with the ruthless CEO narrative she'd constructed. A profile piece described how he'd balanced running his company with caring for his wife during her illness, refusing to step back from either responsibility despite the toll it took. Most revealing was an interview from a tech journal published shortly after his wife's death. The journalist had asked about his future plans, and David's response now seemed painfully relevant. "I've spent my career building technology that connects people, but I'm learning that real connection happens in those unguarded moments when titles and roles fall away. When we're just humans trying to make sense of this messy, beautiful life. Everything else is just noise." The words didn't sound like someone planning to slash departments and eliminate positions without regard for human consequences. They sounded like the man who had sat on her couch last night, whose face had softened when he looked at his sleeping daughter, who had straightened her magazines with that unconscious precision. Rachel closed her laptop more confused than ever. By Sunday evening, she'd cycled through anger, betrayal, uncertainty, and back to anger again, without reaching any satisfying resolution. One thought kept returning, persistent as the rain that continued to fall intermittently outside her window tomorrow. She would face David Brooks, not as the vulnerable father seeking shelter from the storm, but as the CEO with the power to determine her professional future. The question that kept her awake late into Sunday night wasn't about her job security, though that concern lingered. It was simpler and infinitely more complex. Which version of David Brooks would walk into Novatech tomorrow morning? The corporate shark of rumor and reputation, the grieving brother trying to honor a legacy, the devoted father who taught his daughter to ask instead of assume, or some combination she couldn't yet imagine. As she finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, Rachel wondered which version she hoped to see. Monday morning arrived with cruel efficiency, the alarm clock's electronic shriek cutting through dreams that had been invaded by amber emergency lights and the sound of small hands knocking on doors that led nowhere. Rachel stood in the elevator with her colleagues watching the floor numbers climb toward the executive level where her entire department had been summoned for the new CEO's introduction, like livestock being presented for inspection. Around her, conversations buzzed with speculation and anxiety, rumors feeding on themselves until the unknown David Brooks had become a mythical figure of corporate restructuring and employee termination. "I heard he eliminated 30% of staff at his last company," muttered Jenkins from accounting, his voice carrying the hollow ring of someone trying to convince himself of his own value. "Probably wanting to clean house here too. Bring in his own people. Start fresh with employees who don't have preconceived notions about how things should work." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor with a soft chime that sounded like a death knell to Rachel's ears, revealing hallways lined with glass offices that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, you could see a figure in an expensive suit adjusting papers at the head of the table with movements she recognized despite herself, the same precise organization she'd witnessed in her living room. Even from behind, she knew the set of those shoulders, the way his hand moved in that unconscious, straightening gesture that had seemed endearing in her apartment, but now felt like evidence of compulsive control and corporate conditioning. Her stomach churned, colleagues filed past her into the room, their nervous chatter creating a background noise of corporate anxiety and professional dread. When David Brooks turned around to face his new employees for the first time, their eyes met across the crowded room with the impact of a physical collision that left her breathless and exposed. "Good morning, everyone." David's voice carried across the room with newfound authority that made Rachel's skin crawl with recognition and alienation in equal measure. The transformation was complete. From desperate father to corporate executive, from vulnerable human being to polished presenter who could command attention and respect with nothing more than posture and tone. "I know there's been considerable speculation about my vision for Novatech, and I want to address those concerns directly rather than letting rumors and anxiety fester." He clicked to the first slide of his presentation with practiced corporate efficiency, but his gaze kept finding Rachel in the crowd, like a compass needle seeking magnetic north. She forced herself to maintain eye contact, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch under the weight of his attention. "I believe our greatest asset isn't our technology or our market position," he continued, his voice gaining confidence as he settled into his role like an actor finding his character. "It's our people, the individuals who transform ideas into reality every single day, who make this company more than just numbers on financial statements." Murmurs rippled through the room like wind through wheat as employees processed this unexpected message of value rather than the cost-cutting rhetoric they'd been expecting. Rachel felt her breath catch despite her determination to remain unmoved, memories of their conversation about corporate callousness playing against his current words like a twisted echo that made her question everything she thought she knew about sincerity and manipulation. "Which is why I'm announcing a comprehensive 3-year plan for Novatech's growth and development." David continued, clicking to the next slide with numbers that made the room buzz with surprised conversation and cautious optimism. "Beginning with a 10% increase in our employee development budget this year, expanded healthcare benefits, including mental health coverage and family support services that recognize employees as whole human beings rather than just productive units." His eyes found hers again with laser precision that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. and a new program specifically designed for promoting from within. Because sometimes the best leaders are already here, showing kindness to strangers, making impossible decisions, look effortless, proving their worth through actions rather than credentials or connections. The room erupted in surprised chatter as employees processed announcements that contradicted every rumor and expectation they'd harbored about their new CEO. Rachel heard only the thundering of her own heartbeat, David's words echoing in her mind, with implications she wasn't ready to examine or trust. Around her, colleagues who'd entered the room expecting termination notices began to smile, the atmosphere shifting from funeral to celebration, with corporate whiplash that left everyone slightly disoriented. But Rachel remained frozen, caught between relief and confusion, unable to reconcile the man making employee-friendly announcements with the one who had deceived her about his identity for 12 crucial hours. The presentation continued with details about new policies and initiatives, but she absorbed none of it, too busy trying to understand whether she was witnessing genuine reform or elaborate manipulation designed to win hearts and minds before implementing less palatable changes. After the meeting dissolved into excited conversations about unexpected benefits and opportunities, Rachel found herself alone in the empty conference room, like a ship abandoned by its fleet. Papers scattered the polished table remnants of the presentation that had turned her world upside down for the second time in 3 days. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits celebrating the morning's revelations. She stood among the detritus of corporate communication, trying to process emotions that shifted faster than weather patterns: anger, confusion, hope, suspicion, and something that might have been disappointment that his kindness could be real while his honesty remained questionable. When David appeared in the doorway like a ghost materializing from her guilty conscience, she felt her carefully constructed composure threaten to crumble under the weight of unresolved feelings. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice stripped of the authority he'd wielded so effectively minutes before. The expensive suit couldn't disguise the exhaustion etched in every line of his face, the way his tie had been loosened, as if corporate armor had become too restrictive to bear under the weight of pretense. Rachel's hands gripped the back of a chair so tightly her knuckles went white, using the physical anchor to steady herself against the emotional storm his presence always seemed to generate. "What's left to say?" she replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded, despite the chaos in her chest, despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. "You got what you wanted. You saw how the little people really live, how we worry about job security and layoffs, and now you're implementing policies to keep us happy and productive. Very strategic, very corporate." David stepped into the room with careful movements, closing the door behind him with a soft click that made the space feel suddenly intimate, despite its corporate sterility. "I got caught in a lie that became the most honest night of my life," he said quietly, his words carrying weight that seemed to press against the glass walls surrounding them like atmospheric pressure before a storm. "Do you know why I was really out in that storm, Rachel?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice to remain steady, watching as he ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair and destroyed its corporate precision with movements that spoke of frustration and exhaustion. "Because I couldn't face another night in my brother's apartment, surrounded by his things, pretending I wanted this job. He left me like some kind of poisoned inheritance I never asked for, but can't refuse. My brother died 3 months ago." David continued, his voice thick with grief that corporate training hadn't taught him to hide or compartmentalize. "Car accident on a rainy night, just like the one that brought me to your door." One minute he was texting me about quarterly projections and expansion plans, and the next minute I was identifying his body in a hospital that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. He moved to the window, putting distance between them as if physical space could contain the emotional overflow threatening to breach his professional dam. He built this company from nothing, started in our garage when we were kids, turned it into something that mattered, that employed hundreds of people and changed lives. And suddenly I'm supposed to fill his shoes when all I want to do is disappear into the rain and never come back to a world that expects me to be someone I'm not sure I can become. Rachel felt her anger wavering like a candle flame in wind, replaced by something more dangerous: compassion that threatened to undermine every reasonable boundary she'd tried to construct since discovering his identity. "You still lied to me," she whispered, the words coming out smaller than she'd intended, carrying less conviction than she'd hoped for. David nodded, accepting the accusation without attempting to deflect or minimize it. His honesty in this moment making his earlier deception seem even more painful. "I told you I was consulting," he said, turning back to face her with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young, someone who should have been building a life rather than inheriting one. "I am consulting with board members about whether I'm capable of running this company without destroying everything my brother spent his life building. Consulting with the therapists about how to raise a daughter who lost her uncle and gained a father who doesn't know what the hell he's doing most days, who makes decisions about hundreds of people's livelihoods while struggling to figure out what's for dinner." That night, I was driving around in the rain like a coward. David continued, his voice gaining strength as he found his footing in honesty that felt more natural than the corporate persona he'd worn in the meeting. Running away from responsibilities and expectations and the weight of other people's livelihoods, resting on decisions I'm not sure I'm qualified to make from a job I never wanted, but can't abandon because too many people depend on this company for their survival. His laugh came out hollow and self-deprecating, like someone who'd learned not to trust good things to last. "My car died right in your parking lot. Maybe the universe's way of forcing me to stop running from everything that scares me about this position. I heard people talking about that kind girl in 3B at the coffee shop downstairs, said you always helped when people were struggling, that you saw everyone as human instead of just obstacles or opportunities to be managed." His eyes met hers with intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "I thought maybe someone good existed in this world I'm supposed to understand but never quite managed to navigate without feeling like an imposter." The afternoon sun slanted through the conference room windows, with golden persistence casting long shadows across the polished table and highlighting the dust particles that danced between them like tiny witnesses to their confrontation. Rachel studied David's face with new eyes, seeing past the expensive suit and corporate authority to the lost man beneath someone thrust into power he'd never sought, carrying the responsibilities that bent his shoulders despite his attempt to stand straight under their weight. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice softer than she'd intended, curiosity winning over anger despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance. "What do you want from me? Forgiveness, understanding, and some kind of absolution for the deception?" David's hand moved to his watch, the platinum Rolex that had caught streetlight that first night, and betrayed his wealth in the darkness with deliberate movements that spoke of decision rather than hesitation. He unfastened it and set it on the table between them like an offering or admission of guilt. "Because you asked me what I did for work, and I want to give you a real answer this time." He set his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, despite the way his hands shook slightly as he placed the symbol of his wealth and status between them. "I make decisions that affect hundreds of people's livelihoods every single day. I sit in meetings where human beings become numbers on spreadsheets and productivity metrics, determine whether families can pay their mortgages or send their kids to college. I inherited power I never wanted and responsibility that keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if my brother would be proud or horrified by the choices I'm making in his name." The watch caught the afternoon light, throwing small rainbows across the conference table surface, like fractured hope or promises that might never be kept. "But for 12 hours, I was just a father trying to keep his daughter safe. And you saw something in me worth saving, not because of my title or my bank account or my ability to fire you, but because you're the kind of person who opens doors during storms without asking for anything in return." Rachel felt something inside her chest crack open, painful and necessary, like setting a broken bone. The raw honesty in his voice dismantled her defenses more effectively than any corporate strategy could have. She reached for the watch, her fingers brushing against its cold metal surface, feeling the weight of it, the literal and symbolic burden he carried. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, both of them understanding she wasn't talking about the watch. "I don't know how to separate the man who sat in my living room drinking hot chocolate from the CEO who will determine whether I still have a job next month." David's expression softened, understanding crossing his features like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You don't have to figure it out right now, Rachel. Neither do I. I just wanted you to know the truth, all of it, not just the convenient parts. You deserve that much after opening your door to us." The moment hung between them, fragile as blown glass, too delicate to touch, but too valuable to discard. A knock at the door shattered it, reality intruding in the form of a nervous assistant reminding David about his next meeting. The corporate world reclaiming its CEO with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Rachel slid the watch back across the table toward him, a symbolic return to their respective positions in the hierarchy of Novatech. "We'll talk again," David said, not a question, but not quite a command either. Something in between, a negotiation between equals, despite their unequal stations. She nodded once, a tacit agreement to continue what they'd started before turning to leave the conference room and the conflicted emotions it contained. The days that followed took on a surreal quality for Rachel. She moved through her work routine like an actress in a play, going through familiar motions, while feeling fundamentally changed by what had transpired. Colleagues commented on her distraction, assuming it stemmed from anxiety about the new management, unaware that she carried a secret knowledge of their new CEO that both illuminated and complicated everything. David kept his distance, at least physically, but his presence permeated the company in ways that couldn't be ignored. The promised changes began immediately: increased development budgets, expanded benefits, new opportunities for advancement. It was as if he was speaking directly to her through corporate policy, proving his sincerity one initiative at a time. On Wednesday, an email arrived in Rachel's inbox that made her coffee go cold in her hand. The subject line read simply, "Advisory Committee Invitation." The message outlined a new cross-departmental team being formed to consult on company culture and employee engagement. It would report directly to the CEO. Her name had been suggested as a potential member. The final line read, "Your perspective would be invaluable. No pressure, DB." She stared at those initials for longer than professional decorum would justify. Was this special treatment a genuine recognition of her abilities? Or something more complex, an olive branch perhaps? Or an opportunity to keep her close where her knowledge of his vulnerability could be contained? The ambiguity gnawed at her, turning what should have been a professional compliment into another puzzle piece in their complicated dynamic. Rachel closed the email without responding, needing time to consider the implications of accepting such a visible role in David's new vision for the company. Her finger hovered over the delete button, tempted to erase the evidence of his continued interest in her input. Instead, she marked it as unread, a small act of defiance against the pull she felt toward him, despite her lingering wariness. That evening, alone in her apartment, Rachel found herself drawn to the window overlooking the parking lot where David's car had stalled less than a week ago. The space looked ordinary now, no trace remaining of the drama that had unfolded there. She wondered where he was living, still in his brother's apartment, surrounded by ghosts and expectations, or somewhere new, a fresh start for him and Sophie. The thought of the little girl brought a pang of unexpected longing. Rachel had known her for less than 24 hours, yet her absence felt like a small, hollow space in the apartment. She glanced at the shelf where the stuffed elephant had lived for years, forgotten, until it found a new purpose in comforting a child during a storm. Its absence was a tangible reminder of connections formed and broken in the span of a single night. Her phone chimed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She named him Stormy, asks about you every day. "Would you consider having breakfast with us this weekend? No CEO talk, just pancakes." Sophie's request, not mine, David. Rachel's heart performed a complicated gymnastic routine in her chest. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard, typing and deleting multiple responses before settling on, "How did you get my number?" The reply came quickly. "I'm the CEO. I have access to employee records. Not an abuse of power I take lightly, I promise. Just couldn't think of another way to reach you outside work channels." At least he was honest this time. The thought came unbidden, along with a reluctant smile. She considered her options carefully before responding, "Pancakes, Sunday, 10 a.m. Text me the address, just for Sophie." The weekend approached with the inevitability of high tide, bringing with it a mixture of anticipation and dread that kept Rachel awake long past reasonable hours. She found herself obsessively checking news articles about David's previous company, searching for evidence that would either confirm or contradict her conflicting impressions of him. What she discovered only complicated matters further. Employee testimonials painted a picture of a leadership style built on trust and mutual respect. Financial reports showed profitability without the slash-and-burn tactics common in the tech industry. Most revealing was an award his company had received for innovative family leave policies he'd implemented after his wife's cancer diagnosis. The man described in these articles aligned more closely with the father who had held Sophie through the storm than with the corporate shark Rachel had imagined him to be. Yet the deception remained between them, a hairline fracture in the foundation of whatever was building between them, professional or personal. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear, as if the universe had decided to provide optimal conditions for their awkward reunion. Rachel stood outside a modest brownstone in Beacon Hill, double-checking the address David had texted. She had expected something grander, a penthouse downtown perhaps, or at least a luxury condo befitting his status. Instead, she found herself on a quiet residential street lined with historic homes and mature trees, the kind of neighborhood where generations might put down roots. The door opened before she could knock, revealing Sophie with her hair in slightly lopsided pigtails and a gap-toothed smile that melted something frozen in Rachel's chest. "You came," the little girl exclaimed with unrestrained joy that only children can express, launching herself forward to wrap arms around Rachel's waist with a fierce hug that felt like absolution for sins she hadn't committed. "I promised pancakes, didn't I?" Rachel replied, returning the embrace and meeting David's eyes over the child's head. He stood in the hallway dressed in jeans and a faded Harvard sweatshirt, so different from both the desperate father in the storm and the polished CEO that he seemed like a third version of himself, perhaps the most authentic one yet. The kitchen where they ended up was warm and lived in, showing signs of a bachelor father doing his best organizational systems, beginning to form but not yet perfected expensive appliances alongside mismatched dishware. Sophie proudly showed Rachel her special mixing bowl and the wooden spoon that was just the right size for pancake batter, chattering about her new school and the friends she was making with the resilience that children somehow manage even through grief and upheaval. David moved around them with careful consideration of personal space, as if aware of invisible boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. He brewed coffee and sliced fruit with the same precise movements Rachel had observed in her apartment, but here they seemed less like corporate conditioning and more like the habits of someone finding order within chaos, a coping mechanism for a life turned upside down by loss and sudden responsibility. When Sophie insisted on showing Rachel her room with all my books and Stormy's special shelf, David nodded for Rachel to go ahead, giving them space with a sensitivity that spoke of his awareness of the complicated dynamics at play. The little girl's hand in hers felt like trust she hadn't earned, but desperately wanted to deserve. Sophie's room revealed the efforts of a father trying to create stability amid transition. Familiar furniture that must have come from their previous home, mixed with new items chosen to fit the space. Books organized by color rather than alphabet. Sophie's system, she explained proudly. And there, on a special shelf, sat the stuffed elephant, positioned as if overlooking the room like a benevolent guardian. "He keeps the bad dreams away," Sophie confided, her voice dropping to the solemn whisper children use for important secrets. "Daddy said you gave him to me because you're a dream protector too." Rachel's throat tightened at the unexpected title David had bestowed upon her. Not quite sure how to respond, she knelt to Sophie's level instead. "Does he do a good job with the dreams?" Sophie nodded with the absolute certainty only children possess. "He's magic. Like you." The innocent assessment hung in the air between them, a child's perception, uncomplicated by adult complexities. Rachel wondered what it would be like to see the world, to see herself through Sophie's eyes, where people could be simply kind or unkind, helpful, or not without the tangled underbrush of motives and hierarchies and professional boundaries. When they returned downstairs, David was arranging pancakes on plates with the focus of someone performing heart surgery. 3 perfect stacks blueberries arranged in smiley faces that betrayed a father's attempt to infuse joy into ordinary moments. He glanced up as they entered, something vulnerable flashing across his features before being carefully tucked away. Sophie insisted on sitting between them at the table, creating a buffer that seemed symbolic of their current relationship, connected through her, but maintaining careful distance from each other. The conversation stayed deliberately light, focused on Sophie's world and neutral topics that wouldn't threaten the fragile truce established by pancakes and Sunday morning sunlight. It wasn't until Sophie dashed off to find a drawing she wanted to show Rachel that David broached more sensitive territory. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, his focus seemingly absorbed by tracing patterns in syrup with his fork. "I know it's complicated. Everything about this situation is complicated. But Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you since that night, and I thought—" His voice trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished, but somehow more powerful in its incompletion. Rachel studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the careful control he maintained even in this casual setting. You thought what she pressed, needing more than fragments to rebuild trust, shattered by deception, however well-intentioned. David met her gaze directly, abandoning pretense along with his fork. I thought maybe we could start over, not pretending that night didn't happen or that I'm not who I am professionally, but his hands opened in a gesture of supplication or surrender. Maybe we could try being honest with each other from this point forward. See where that leads. The proposition hung between them, simple in concept, but monumental in implication. Before Rachel could formulate a response, Sophie bounded back into the room, proudly displaying a crayon drawing of three stick figures, one tall with brown hair, one medium with yellow hair, and one small with brown pigtails. Our Storm family, she announced, presenting it to Rachel with the solemnity of bestowing a priceless gift. Rachel accepted the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the child's uncomplicated inclusion of her in their family, however fictitious. Sophie's innocent perspective cut through the tangled undergrowth of adult complications like a beam of pure light. In her world, they were connected simply because they had weathered a storm together. No corporate hierarchies, no deceptions, no complicated histories. Just three people who had found shelter in each other. Looking up from the drawing, Rachel found David watching her, his expression unguarded for perhaps the first time since she'd met him, hope and fear and something else she wasn't ready to name visible in equal measure. The moment stretched between them like a bridge. Neither was quite brave enough to cross. I should go, Rachel said, finally carefully placing the drawing on the table between them, another symbol in their relationship built on meaningful objects. Thank you for breakfast. And please, thanks Sophie for the beautiful artwork. David nodded, disappointment evident in his eyes, but acceptance in his posture. I'll walk you out, he offered, following her to the door with careful distance maintained between them. At the threshold he paused, seeming to gather courage for words that mattered. The advisory committee is real, Rachel. Your invitation wasn't special treatment or manipulation. You have insights about company culture that could be valuable completely separate from. He gestured vaguely between them, encompassing whatever unnamed connection had formed during the storm and its aftermath. Your professional contributions stand on their own merit. She believed him, which was perhaps the most surprising development of the morning. Despite everything, despite the lingering wariness and the professional complications, she found herself trusting the sincerity in his voice, the earnestness in his eyes. I'll think about it, she promised, meaning it. As she turned to go, David spoke again, his voice pitched low to avoid Sophie overhearing from inside. That drawing, the Storm family. I hope you know I would never pressure you about that. Sophie forms attachments quickly, especially since her mother died, but I understand that professional boundaries between us make any personal connection complicated. Rachel paused on the doorstep, weighing her response carefully. She could maintain those boundaries firmly, make it clear that their relationship would remain strictly professional despite Sophie's wishful thinking. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. Instead, she found herself saying, complicated doesn't necessarily mean impossible. It just means we need to be more careful about how we move forward. Hope bloomed across David's features like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, quickly tempered by cautious restraint. Of course, professional first always. I would never want to compromise your position at Novatech. Rachel nodded, appreciating his understanding, while recognizing the fundamental power imbalance that would always exist between them as long as he signed her paychecks. I should go, she repeated, not quite ready to explore all the implications of moving forward in whatever capacity. The week that followed brought a subtle shift in Rachel's professional life. She accepted the position on the advisory committee, attending her first meeting on Wednesday, with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. David conducted it with professional detachment, giving no indication that they had shared pancakes and family drawings just days before. Yet she caught moments when his guard slipped a quirk of his lips when someone made a point similar to arguments she'd raised in her living room, a brief glance in her direction when policies affecting working parents came up for discussion. By Friday, rumors had begun circulating about Rachel's sudden promotion to the CEO's inner circle. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged her existence now sought her out, probing for insights into the mysterious David Brooks and his plans for the company. The attention made her uncomfortable, highlighting the precarious position she occupied. Not quite an executive, not just another employee caught in a liminal space partially of her own making. After fielding yet another thinly veiled interrogation about her connection to the new CEO, Rachel retreated to the solitude of an empty conference room, seeking respite from the office politics her new position had thrust upon her. She hadn't expected the professional complications that would arise from their personal connection, however tenuous and undefined that connection might be. The door opened behind her, admitting David with an apologetic expression that suggested he'd been looking for her specifically. "I heard there's been talk," he said without preamble, closing the door to ensure privacy. "About why you're on the committee, about whether there's something—" He paused, searching for an appropriate word. "Something personal influencing professional decisions." Rachel leaned against the conference table, suddenly tired of tiptoeing around the elephant in the room, an image that brought unwanted thoughts of Sophie's stuffed companion and the drawing still displayed on her refrigerator at home. "There is something personal," she acknowledged bluntly. "We both know that. The question is whether we can prevent it from overshadowing the professional relationship we need to maintain." David ran a hand through his hair, destroying its corporate perfection in a gesture she now recognized as a sign of genuine emotion breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "I've been thinking about that, about the impossible position I've put you in." He paced toward the window, keeping distance between them, as if proximity might complicate matters further. "I could transfer you to another department," he offered, his voice carefully neutral. "Give you a promotion that would be justified by your performance record, move you under a different reporting structure. Create more separation between us professionally." The offer should have been welcome, a clean solution to the whispers and sidelong glances, the questions about her qualifications versus her connections. Instead, Rachel felt an unexpected surge of resistance. "That sounds reasonable on paper," she admitted. "But wouldn't it just fuel the rumors? Sudden promotion, department transfer, special treatment?" David turned back to face her, his expression troubled. "What would you suggest then? I don't want to damage your professional reputation or future at Novatech." The concern in his voice felt genuine, touching something inside Rachel that had grown increasingly responsive to his particular frequency of sincerity. Her mind working through possibilities, weighing professional prudence against personal inclinations that were becoming harder to ignore. "We continue exactly as we are professionally," she decided aloud. "I serve on the committee because I'm qualified to do so. You treat me with the same professional respect you show everyone else, no special favors, no particular attention. We create distance through transparency rather than structural changes." David considered her suggestion, nodding slowly as he processed its implications. And personally, he asked the question, hanging between them like delicate crystal, breathtaking and breakable. Rachel met his gaze directly, refusing to hide from the complexity of their situation. "Personally, I'm still figuring that out. I need time to separate the man from the CEO, to understand who you really are when you're not in either crisis mode or corporate mode." A small smile touched David's lips, not the polished CEO version, but something more genuine. "That seems fair. Time and transparency." For Sophie's sake, if nothing else, Rachel added, unwilling to acknowledge aloud the other reasons she might want to understand the man behind the professional mask. "The little girl has attached herself to both of us now, and I don't want to disappear from her life completely, especially after what she's already lost." David's expression softened at the mention of his daughter, genuine affection, replacing corporate calculation. "She asks about you constantly. Wants to know when we can have pancakes again, or when you'll come see Stormy's new bow tie." The image of the stuffed elephant sporting formal wear brought an involuntary smile to Rachel's lips. "Maybe next weekend," she suggested, the words emerging before professional caution could censor them. "Strictly as Sophie's friend. Nothing more complicated than that for now." "Nothing more complicated than that," David echoed the phrase, carrying weight beyond its simple syllables. An acknowledgement of boundaries established, impossibilities left unexplored for the moment. They stood in silent agreement, neither pushing for definitions or commitments beyond what felt manageable in their uniquely tangled circumstances. The weekend approached with both anticipation and apprehension coloring Rachel's thoughts. Her professional life had stabilized somewhat, the initial flurry of gossip about her connection to David settling into background noise as his consistent fair treatment of all employees became apparent. The advisory committee was making real progress, her contributions respected and implemented without special favor or scrutiny. Yet the personal dimension remained unresolved, existing in a space between friendship and something unnamed, complicated by professional hierarchies and lingering echoes of initial deception. Rachel found herself analyzing every interaction, weighing sincerity against strategy, genuine connection against corporate calculation. Saturday evening brought unexpected clarity in the form of an emergency call from David, his voice tight with concern. Sophie's running a high fever, the babysitter can't stay overnight, and he has an investor call that can't be rescheduled. Could she possibly? The request hung unfinished vulnerability evident even through the phone's tinny speaker. Rachel didn't hesitate, gathering her purse and keys before the call even ended. 20 minutes later, she found herself in David's kitchen, receiving hurried instructions about medicine dosages and emergency contacts as he prepared for a video conference that could determine Novatech's financial future. I wouldn't ask if there was anyone else, he explained, the circles under his eyes testifying to sleepless nights, balancing parental concerns with corporate responsibilities. But Sophie asked for you specifically, and I thought. His voice trailed off, uncertainty replacing the CEO confidence he wore at work. It's okay, Rachel assured him, meaning it despite the complicated implications of stepping further into their lives. Sophie and I will be fine. Go be the CEO for a few hours. We'll hold down the fort here. Relief washed across his features, followed quickly by gratitude that seemed to transcend professional boundaries. He squeezed her hand briefly, the touch electric and gone before she could process its impact. Thank you for seeing us, both of us, as people first. Not everyone does. The simple acknowledgement touched something fundamental in Rachel's understanding of him, the recognition that beyond titles and roles, beyond wealth and power, David Brooks struggled with the same basic human need to be seen and known for himself rather than the positions he occupied. In that moment, the last pieces of her resistance began to crumble, replaced by an acceptance that whatever developed between them would be built on this foundation of mutual recognition. Hours later, after Sophie's fever had broken and the child had fallen into peaceful sleep, Rachel waited in the living room, her professional boundaries blurring further with each minute spent in the private spaces of David's life. When he finally returned, jacket discarded and tie loosened, fatigue evident in every line of his body, she offered a simple report on Sophie's condition rather than the complicated emotions swirling beneath her calm exterior. The investors are in, David shared, collapsing onto the couch beside her with none of the careful distance he typically maintained. 3 years of secure funding for all the initiatives I outlined. No pressure to cut staff or reduce benefits. His relief was palpable, the weight of hundreds of livelihoods temporarily lifted from his shoulders. That's wonderful news, Rachel said sincerely, genuinely glad for what it meant for Novatech employees, herself included. James would be proud of what you're building on his foundation. The mention of his brother's name brought a complicated mixture of emotions to David's expression, grief and pride and lingering uncertainty. I hope so, he admitted quietly. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part, the responsible CEO, the competent father, when really I'm just making it up as I go, hoping no one notices I'm not qualified for either role. The confession, offered without calculation or pretense, created a moment of perfect transparency between them. Rachel recognized in his words the same imposter syndrome that plagued her in professional settings, the fear of being exposed as inadequate despite external success. The recognition of shared vulnerability bridged the remaining distance between their experiences more effectively than any corporate initiative or careful negotiation could have. From what I've seen, she offered carefully, you're doing better than you think. At both jobs. David turned to face her fully, the professional mask completely absent, now replaced by raw honesty that made him appear younger and simultaneously more substantial. That it might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me since James died. Most people either expect perfect competence because of my position, or they're waiting for me to fail so they can step in and take over. Rachel understood suddenly that despite his title and authority, despite his wealth and privilege, David Brooks was fundamentally alone in his dual responsibilities, carrying burdens he hadn't chosen, but couldn't abandon, navigating grief and corporate politics and single parenthood without a reliable compass to guide him. The realization shifted something fundamental in her perception of him, transforming him from a symbol of corporate authority into simply a man doing his best under impossible circumstances. The final walls of her resistance crumbled under the weight of this new understanding, leaving her uncertain where professional caution ended and personal connection began. "You don't have to do it all alone, you know," she said quietly, the words emerging from some deeper place than conscious thought. The offer hung between them, its boundaries undefined, but its sincerity unmistakable. David studied her face as if searching for hidden motives or professional calculations, finding none in her open expression. "I'm beginning to believe that," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "For the first time since everything fell apart, I'm beginning to believe I don't have to weather every storm alone." The echo of their first meeting, the literal storm that had brought them together, resonated in his words, creating a symmetry that felt meaningful beyond rational explanation. Outside, gentle rain began to fall, so different from the violent deluge of their first encounter, a baptism rather than a flood, washing away pretense and professional distance to reveal the human connection forming beneath. Neither moved to close the physical gap between them, both aware of boundaries still requiring respect and recognition. But something shifted nonetheless, an invisible barrier dissolving to reveal a path forward. Neither had fully anticipated, but both now recognized as not just possible, but perhaps inevitable. Like the gentle rain outside, it came not in a dramatic downpour, but in the quiet persistence of accumulated moments, pancake breakfasts and fevered children, corporate presentations and honest confessions, each drop bringing them closer to whatever lay on the other side of the storm they'd weathered together. 3 months passed, each day building upon the foundation laid during that rainy weekend. The advisory committee flourished under Rachel's contributions, implementing changes that rippled through Novatech with tangible results. Employee satisfaction surveys showed marked improvement, productivity increased without sacrificing work-life balance, and the once dreaded quarterly reviews became opportunities for growth rather than exercises in fear. Rachel's professional reputation solidified as someone who spoke truth to power, unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom while offering practical alternatives. Her position on the committee gave her visibility throughout the company, but it was her ideas rather than her connection to David that ultimately earned respect from colleagues who had initially questioned her qualifications. Their personal relationship evolved with careful consideration of professional boundaries maintained through transparency rather than distance. Weekend pancake breakfasts became a ritual, Sophie serving as both bridge and buffer between adults, navigating complicated emotions beneath casual conversation. Small moments accumulated into meaningful patterns, David unconsciously straightening Rachel's bookshelf while listening to her ideas about marketing strategy, Rachel automatically reaching for Sophie's hand when crossing streets during their increasingly frequent outings, the three of them developing inside jokes and shared references that created a sense of belonging separate from corporate hierarchies. No declarations had been made, no lines definitively crossed, yet something undeniable was growing between them, a connection neither sought, but both now privately considered essential. They existed in a liminal space between colleagues and something more intimate, neither rushing to define what was developing nor denying its significance. The autumn evening found Rachel alone in her apartment, reviewing presentation materials for tomorrow's board meeting. As the committee's representative, she would be presenting their recommendations directly to Novatech's leadership, a professional milestone that both thrilled and terrified her. David had recused himself from providing feedback on her presentation, insisting she needed to succeed or fail on her own merits, a decision she respected despite the additional pressure it created. A light knock interrupted her concentration, unexpected and familiar, in a way that made her heart quicken. Through the peephole, she saw David alone and unannounced, holding a folder with the Novatech logo. The role reversal wasn't lost on her. This time, she was the one cautiously opening the door to the unexpected visitor, though without the rain and desperation that had marked their first encounter. "I know this is unprofessional," David began without preamble, holding up the folder like a shield or peace offering. "But I found these market projections that might strengthen your presentation tomorrow, and I thought—" He paused, seeming to reassess his motivations under her steady gaze. "That's not why I'm here. Not really." Rachel stepped aside to let him in, curiosity outweighing professional caution. The apartment felt different with him in it, now smaller, yet more complete, as if he filled a space that had been reserved but empty these past months. "The storm that brought us together was almost exactly 3 months ago," she observed, watching as he automatically straightened a stack of magazines on her coffee table. the gesture now endearing rather than suspicious. 3 months, 12 board meetings, and 27 pancake breakfasts, David replied, precision, revealing how carefully he'd been tracking their evolving connection. But who's counting? The self-deprecating humor softened the moment, allowing Rachel to address the obvious question. Why are you really here, David? No corporate pretense, no convenient excuses. Just the truth. He set the folder down, abandoning the professional facade entirely. Because tomorrow you're presenting to the board, and regardless of the outcome, it marks the end of something and the beginning of something else. The committee has accomplished what it set out to do. Your formal role as my advisor is coming to a natural conclusion. The unspoken implications hung between them. Without the committee as professional justification, what reason would they have to continue their careful dance between personal and professional? What would define their relationship moving forward? So you came to say goodbye? Rachel asked the question sharper than intended, betraying how deeply the prospect of disconnection cut despite her efforts to maintain emotional distance. David's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into raw honesty. I came to ask what happens next, between us, without the professional structure that's given us permission to be in each other's lives. Sophie asked me every Sunday night if you'll be there the following weekend. I find myself doing the same. The confession cracks something open between them, the careful veneer of professional collegiality finally giving way to the truth they'd been circling for months. Rachel felt her carefully maintained boundaries wavering, the distinction between CEO and David, between professional obligation and personal desire blurring beyond recognition. What do you want to happen next? She countered, unwilling to be the first to articulate the possibilities hovering just beyond their careful restraint. David moved toward her window, the same one where she'd first spotted him in the storm gazing out at the now peaceful parking lot below. I want to stop pretending that what's happening between us can be contained in professional classifications or weekend pancake breakfasts. I want permission to care about you without qualifying it through Sophie or the committee or any other convenient excuse. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned, stripped of corporate calculation or paternal responsibility. For the first time since she'd known him, David spoke solely as himself, not CEO, not grieving, brother, not single father, just a man acknowledging feelings he could no longer compartmentalize. And if I'm not ready to give that permission, Rachel asked, testing the boundaries of his declaration, needing to understand what happened to their carefully constructed relationship if she couldn't meet him in this new territory. Then we find a new structure that works, David replied without hesitation. I'm not proposing an ultimatum, Rachel. I'm asking for honesty about where we stand and where we might be heading. Sophie deserves that clarity. So do we. The mention of Sophie crystallized something Rachel had been avoiding. Acknowledging the little girl had become important to her in ways that transcended her connection to David. Somewhere between stuffed elephants and pancake sundaes, she had developed genuine love for this child who saw her as magical, as a protector against bad dreams and rainstorms. I care about Sophie, she admitted, the words feeling insufficient for the depth of attachment she felt toward the girl who had crashed into her life during a literal storm and created emotional upheaval just as powerful. And I care about you in ways that terrify me professionally and personally. The admission cost her something precious. The illusion of detachment she'd maintained as protection against potential hurt, against the power imbalance that still existed between them, despite 3 months of careful negotiation and boundary setting. David recognized the significance of her concession, approaching slowly, as if giving her time to retreat if needed. What terrifies you about caring, he asked, stopping just beyond arm's reach, maintaining physical distance while closing emotional gaps. Rachel considered the question seriously, owing him the honest self-reflection he'd demonstrated. Everything, she admitted finally, the professional complications, the fact that you're still my boss, no matter how carefully we've tried to separate our roles, the risk to my career if this goes badly. She paused, gathering courage for the deeper truth. But mostly I'm terrified of becoming part of something that could break apart again, of loving Sophie and then losing her if you and I don't work out, of becoming another person who disappears from her life after she's already lost so much. Understanding bloomed across David's features, followed by something that looked remarkably like love, though neither had used that word yet. That's what finally convinced me to come here tonight, he confessed, his voice dropping to match the intimacy of the moment. Watching you worry about how your presence or absence might affect Sophie, that's not the calculation of someone just being kind or fulfilling professional obligations. Something unlocked in Rachel's chest at his recognition, the acknowledgement that her concerns stemmed from genuine attachment rather than temporary charity or professional networking. For 3 months, they had been building something neither had named, but both now recognized as family unconventional, unplanned but undeniably real. So what happens tomorrow? Rachel asked the question, encompassing far more than her board presentation. How do we move forward without the professional structures that have given us permission to be in each other's lives? David closed the remaining distance between them, close enough now that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes, could catch the faint scent of his cologne. No longer the expensive brand from that first night, but something simpler, more authentic. Tomorrow you wow the board with your presentation, which they'll approve because your ideas are brilliant. And then regardless of that outcome, I'll be waiting with an offer Rachel repeated, professional instincts immediately alert, despite the personal nature of their conversation. A choice David amended, recognizing her wariness. To continue building whatever this is between us, me, you, Sophie, without hiding behind professional justifications. To acknowledge that something extraordinary happened the night you opened your door to strangers in a storm, something worth exploring without corporate boundaries or convenient excuses. The proposition hung between them, breathtaking in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Rachel studied his face, searching for signs of the calculating CEO or the desperate father she'd first encountered. Instead, she found only David, flawed, sincere, and patiently waiting for her to determine what happened next. And if the board hates my presentation, she challenged, testing the conditional nature of his offer. If my professional star at Novatech starts to fade rather than rise, then the offer stands even more firmly. David replied without hesitation. Because it has nothing to do with your professional status and everything to do with who you are when titles and roles fall away. The echo of the interview she'd read months ago, his words about connection happening when titles and roles disappeared, struck Rachel with unexpected force. He had been living that philosophy even before they met, even before circumstances forced him into roles he hadn't chosen, but was nonetheless fulfilling with growing confidence. I'll need time, she said finally, unwilling to make impulsive decisions despite the emotional gravity pulling them together. Not just for my sake, but for Sophie's. She deserves thoughtful adults in her life, not people who rush into things without considering consequences. David's expression reflected respect rather than disappointment at her measured response. Time is something I can give, he agreed, the simple promise carrying more weight than flowery declarations might have. Sophie and I aren't going anywhere. The board meeting arrived with merciless punctuality, fluorescent lights illuminating the conference room where Rachel had confronted David 3 months earlier. Now she stood at the head of the table, presenting recommendations to Novatech's leadership with confidence built through months of meaningful work. David sat among the board members, professional distance maintained through his position at the far end of the table, though his eyes conveyed support uncomplicated by their personal connection. Her presentation flowed with practiced precision data and anecdotes intertwining to create a compelling case for permanent implementation of the committee's initiatives. Board members leaned forward with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that indicated engagement rather than skepticism. When the final slide appeared, Rachel felt the strange weightlessness of completion. 3 months of work distilled into 20 minutes that would determine Novatech's cultural direction moving forward. The board's response exceeded even her cautious optimism. Unanimous approval, additional funding for implementation, and a new permanent position created to oversee the continued development of employee-centered policies. The chairman's announcement reverberated through the room like physical force. And we'd like to offer you the role of Chief Cultural Officer, Ms. Morgan, reporting directly to the board rather than to Mr. Brooks, to maintain appropriate professional boundaries given your working relationship. The unexpected promotion created a moment of perfect clarity for Rachel. Her professional trajectory had just accelerated beyond her most ambitious dreams, yet her first instinct was to look for David's reaction. He met her gaze across the conference table, genuine pride evident in his expression, alongside something more personal understanding of what this meant, not just professionally, but for the decision she'd been contemplating since his visit to her apartment. The new reporting structure removed the final professional barrier between them. She would no longer be David's subordinate in any meaningful sense, eliminating the power imbalance that had complicated their relationship from the beginning. The choice he'd offered now stood unencumbered by corporate hierarchy, reduced to its essential question: what did she want their relationship to become? After the meeting dissolved into congratulations and planning discussions, Rachel found herself alone in the executive bathroom, splashing cold water on flushed cheeks while processing the implications of the morning's events. The woman in the mirror looked simultaneously familiar and transformed, professionally validated. Beyond question, personally standing at a crossroads that would determine far more than her career path. The door opened to admit David, his presence in the women's executive bathroom, raising eyebrows she couldn't see, but could certainly imagine. I checked that it was empty. First, he explained, anticipating her unspoken question. I wanted to congratulate you privately before the office rumor mill starts spinning theories about your promotion and our relationship. Rachel dried her hands with deliberate movements, buying time to organize thoughts scattered by the morning's developments. Thank you for recusing yourself from the decision, she said, finally recognizing the professional courtesy that had protected her accomplishment from accusations of favoritism. I assume that was your doing. David leaned against the counter, careful to maintain appropriate distance despite the intimate setting. The board suggested it, actually. They've noticed our connection despite our best efforts at professional discretion. The chairman thought this reporting structure would remove any appearance of impropriety while allowing the company to benefit from your talents. The revelation that their careful boundary maintenance hadn't fooled Novatech's leadership should have been embarrassing, yet Rachel felt only relief, as if a secret too heavy to carry had been gently taken from her shoulders. So everyone knows, she asked, uncertain whether to be mortified or liberated by the prospect. They know there's something, David clarified. Not the specifics, not the whole story, just that there's a personal dimension to our professional relationship. And remarkably, they seem to think that's okay as long as appropriate structures are in place. The absolution from an unexpected source, corporate leadership, typically obsessed with propriety and appearance, struck Rachel as faintly miraculous. 3 months ago, she had feared this exact scenario: rumors, speculation, professional complications arising from personal connections. Yet here it was acknowledged and accommodated rather than condemned or punished. So what happens now? She asked, the question encompassing far more than professional next steps. David straightened from his casual position, moving toward the door to restore professional distance now that his congratulations had been delivered. That depends entirely on you, Rachel. I meant what I said last night. Sophie and I will be waiting for whatever you decide for however long you need to decide it. He paused at the threshold, 1 foot in the corporate world, 1 foot in the personal space they'd been carefully navigating for months. My brother used to say that the most important decisions in life should be made twice, once with the head, once with the heart. Your head has all the information it needs now. I'll be at the cafe where we had breakfast after that first weekend at 6 tonight, if your heart wants to continue the conversation. With that parting statement, he slipped back into the corporate world, leaving Rachel alone with her reflection and the choice that had been clarified but not simplified by the morning's professional triumph. The afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations and planning meetings, colleagues who had once whispered about her connection to David, now openly seeking her input on company culture and employee engagement. The new position came with an office on the executive floor, movers already transferring her belongings, while she attended back-to-back orientations for her expanded responsibilities. Amid the professional whirlwind, Rachel's thoughts repeatedly drifted to the cafe where David would be waiting, to the decision that loomed larger than any corporate promotion or title change. By 5:30, she found herself in her new office, staring at the Boston skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that emphasized just how far she had climbed in 3 short months. A soft knock interrupted her contemplation, admitting Sophie and her babysitter, the little girl bouncing with barely contained excitement, the young woman apologetic about the interruption. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Morgan." She insisted on stopping by to congratulate you before their dinner plans. I couldn't convince her to wait until the weekend. Rachel knelt to Sophie's level, genuine joy, replacing professional preoccupation as small arms wrapped around her neck with fierce affection. "Daddy said you got a super important job because you're the smartest person in the whole building," the child declared with absolute conviction. Even smarter than him, the unguarded pride in Sophie's voice, pride in Rachel, rather than possessiveness over her father's authority, crystallized something that had been forming in Rachel's heart for months. This child had carved out space for her without reservation, offering trust and affection, without the complications adults brought to relationships. In Sophie's world, Rachel belonged simply because she made hot chocolate during storms and remembered which pancake toppings were favorites. Did you know we're having dinner at the special cafe tonight? Sophie continued, unaware of the significance her innocent revelation carried. Daddy said it's a celebration for your new job, but I think it's because he likes when you laugh at his jokes, even though they're not very funny. The babysitter intervened with gentle embarrassment, guiding Sophie toward the door with apologies for the interruption. Rachel watched them go, the child's unguarded assessment echoing in the empty office the simple truth that had been obscured by professional complications and adult hesitations. David liked when she laughed at his jokes. Sophie wanted her at their special cafe. And despite every rational argument for caution, Rachel wanted to be there too. 6 o'clock found her standing outside the cafe watching through the window as David helped Sophie arrange sugar packets into elaborate patterns on their table, a father fully present in his daughter's world, despite the professional pressures he carried. Neither had noticed her yet, giving Rachel one final moment to consider the threshold she was about to cross. 3 months ago, she had opened her door to strangers during a storm, an act of basic kindness that had altered the trajectory of 3 lives in ways none could have anticipated. Tonight she stood at another door, another threshold between safety and risk, between self-protection and the vulnerability of connection. The gentle rain that began to fall seemed cosmically appropriate, not the violent deluge of their first meeting, but a soft reminder of beginnings and possibilities of shelter found in unexpected places. Rachel pushed open the cafe door, the bell's gentle chime causing both Brooks' heads to turn in perfect synchronicity, twin expressions of joy illuminating their features upon recognizing her. "You came," Sophie exclaimed with unrestrained delight, slipping from her chair to launch herself at Rachel with the absolute certainty of welcome that only children possess. "I saved you the blue chair because blue is the best color and you're the best person." The simple equation of childhood logic brought unexpected tears to Rachel's eyes as she returned the enthusiastic embrace. David remained seated watching their interaction with an expression that contained multitudes' hope and hesitation, joy and vulnerability, the careful restraint of someone afraid to assume too much, despite overwhelming evidence. When Sophie returned to her artistic endeavors with the sugar packets, Rachel took the blue chair that had been reserved for her, meeting David's questioning gaze across the small table that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward whatever they were becoming. "I made both decisions," she said, simply answering the question he hadn't asked aloud. Head and heart, they finally agree. Understanding bloomed across David's features, followed by cautious optimism, too disciplined to assume specific meaning without confirmation. "And what did they decide?" he asked, the careful neutrality in his voice belied by the intensity of his gaze. Rachel glanced at Sophie, happily absorbed in her sugar packet architecture and oblivious to the life-altering conversation happening inches away. That some storms aren't meant to be weathered alone. That family can form in unexpected moments between unlikely people. Her voice softened, intended for David alone. That I'd rather risk getting hurt than miss whatever extraordinary thing is happening between the three of us. The declaration hung between them, unadorned by corporate jargon or careful qualifications. Simple truth offered without strategic calculation or professional networking goals. David's hand moved across the table, palm up in invitation rather than demand, allowing Rachel to determine the final distance between them. She placed her hand in his, the physical connection mirroring the emotional bridge they'd been building since that first rainy night. Sophie looked up from her sugar packet, Metropolis observing their joined hands with the satisfaction of a child seeing confirmation of something she'd known all along. "Does this mean Rachel is part of our Storma family for real?" Now she asked, child's intuition cutting through adult complexities with laser precision. Not just on the drawing, David looked to Rachel, allowing her to define the parameters of her own inclusion, rather than presuming to speak on her behalf. Rachel felt the weight of the moment, not just her answer to Sophie, but her commitment to whatever lay ahead for all of them, with all its complexity and potential for both joy and heartbreak. "Family isn't about storms or drawings," sweetheart, Rachel replied, choosing her words carefully for the child who had claimed her heart long before she'd admitted it to herself. "It's about who you choose to build shelters with, who you trust to keep you safe when the rain comes. And yes, if it's okay with you, I'd like to be part of your family through sunshine and storms and everything in between. Sophie's face lit with the pure joy of wishes fulfilled, her small hand reaching out to complete the circle formed by their joined hands on the cafe table. Outside, the gentle rain continued to fall, no longer a threat, but a reminder of beginnings of doors open to strangers who became family of storms that brought unexpected gifts of shelter, found not in places but in people who chose each other deliberately, eyes wide open to both the risks and the extraordinary possibilities of building something lasting from chance encounters and rain-soaked beginnings. Through the cafe window, the parking lot where David's car had stalled 3 months ago gleamed with reflected streetlight on wet asphalt, transformed from the site of crisis to the beginning of their unconventional story. The storm that had brought them together had long since passed, but its echoes remained in stuffed elephants named Stormy, in pancake traditions, and inside jokes in the new family, forming one choice at a time around a cafe table on a rainy evening that felt not like an ending but a more intentional beginning.